There are so many things that we need to do differently around the actual guts of our democracy. We need to fix all of those things if we're going to fix the big substantive things that are posing a challenge for our existence.
My name is Kamal Shege, and I lead the Washington Community Alliance, a network of organizations of color. And I'm really excited to be talking with King County Councilmember Girmay Zahilay here with me today.
My name is Girmay Zahilay. I'm a King County council member and I represent King County's District 2. We have about 260,000 residents in the district and it's one of the most diverse districts in the state of Washington.
I wanted to talk to you today about some of the big issues that are present in our electoral systems and some of the solutions that I know you've been thinking about along with lots of community organizations. And one of them is ranked choice voting. So we want to start with a fun question, ranking choices and being able to have and fully express yourself rather than just being pigeonholed into one choice. Okay. So imagine you and I are going on a cross-country trip. Mm-hmm. I'm driving. Uh-huh. And you get the aux cord and each decide on one artist we're going to listen to their whole repository of music on this road trip. Okay. And we're going to give you 5 choices. Okay. You rank top to bottom who we should listen to. Okay. 1, Bad Bunny, Beyonce, Selena, Whitney Houston, Taylor Swift.
Who I'm ranking first is super easy. The GOAT, Whitney Houston, is number 1. Then I'll go to the Queen, Beyonce. Mm-hmm. Then it starts to get tricky. I'll probably go Selena 3rd, Bad Bunny 4th, and Taylor Swift 5th. How about you?
I think that's a great way to rank them. I think we have similar tastes. And that would be a lot different if all you got was one choice. I might have to think about, what your assumptions are about Beyonce if all you had to do was pick one and pick Whitney.
Yeah, we don't want the Whitney fans going up against the Beehive. That's not a good look, no.
It could get dangerous.
It could get real dangerous.
So one thing people might be wondering is why they should even care about county councils and commissions or how we elect our county council members and county commissioners. So would you want to speak to what county governments do and what they're responsible for and why people should pay attention to them?
Yeah, county government is a super important level of government. You can think of it as being the provider of these broad regional services to the 39 cities within King County. Broad regional services like King County Metro, King County Courts, King County Public Health, King County Parks. So these are all things that people need in their day-to-day lives to survive, even if they don't actively think about it every day.
Why would it be important that our county governments are representative to the public?
We make the best policies as a government when the most number of people are active and engaged. We don't want to leave any voices out. So if we have a reflective level of government, then we'll have reflective budgets and we'll have reflective policies that reach every single corner of our region and make sure that everybody can thrive and live a great life in King County.
So as you know, in Washington State, we have 39 counties, over 130 county council members and commissioners. And we're really shocked to learn just how unrepresentative they are across the state. So out of those over 130 county commissioners and council members, there are just 2 county council members and commissioners of color, and you're one of them. When you see disparities that large, they feel like the problems are structural and systemic. A lot of times people will look at those disparities and the solution that comes to mind is, well, why aren't more people of color running for county council? Why aren't more people running for county commissioner? Does that feel right to you?
I don't think that is the primary issue. I see people of color running at every level of government, and there are just so many obstacles. Right now, in a winner-take-all system that is by district, we rely on concentrations of people of color in a particular district to elect people of color to office. Realistically speaking, that's how I'm in office, because I'm in King County's District 2, a very diverse district. And so I would probably have the base to run here. That doesn't exist everywhere. We live in a state that's over 2/3 white. And so we need a system where we don't have to have concentrations of people of color in order to elect people of color. We should have proportional representation. If we have 1/3 of our state are people of color, we should have a system where theoretically we should have 1/3 of our elected officials being people of color. And I know you know about some systems that could lead to something like that, right?
Yeah, and the way we think about it is there's kind of two problems. One is the process of how people get elected. Right now, we ask people to just pick one out of many candidates, and we never get to fully hear what they think of candidates that might not be their first choice, but might be interesting to them or have some alignment. And so there's that single choice problem when people are looking at their ballots. And then there's the outcomes that you're talking about, which is if we rely on these winner-take-all districts where 51% of the people get 100% of the representation in that area, and there's this other 49% of people that get zero representation, even though they probably have something to contribute to the issues that you're talking about on county council. It's important that they have some voice, even if they don't have a majority of the voice. You're totally right that right now our electoral systems rely on creating majority-minority districts. So looking at the problem as there are too many majority white winner-take-all districts, we'll add a winner-take-all district for people of color. And that is the way that right now we try to create systems where communities of color can elect their candidates of choice. But that isn't always possible or proportionate. So for you, are there other problems that you see with relying on a system that has to have a group of people concentrated in one area for them to be able to have representation?
Yeah, a couple other things. One of the biggest economic dynamics that we're seeing in the past decade is gentrification and displacement. When communities lose their cohesiveness because they are being driven out economically and losing their homes, that diminishes their voting power, their power as a voting bloc. And so that's another issue that could be solved for by approaching a different system. The other issue is that our current winner-take-all system promotes infighting. If you have one slot to vote for somebody, that creates a more combative system both amongst the candidates and amongst voters. And so if you have one district that is majority-minority, then all of the people of color want to run in that district, and that suddenly creates a combative relationship. Rather than if there were 9 slots that people could run for, or maybe 3 on a given year, depending how you want to set it up, then it becomes less combative. Like-minded communities can run as coalitions, can work together, can share ideas. I think that's probably one of the most powerful aspects of ranked choice voting.
You've been successful inside of the current system, getting elected. What was that like? Were you campaigning in that environment, and how do you think it would be different if you were running in an election with ranked choice voting, or an election where there's multiple winners from the one district that you're running in?
Yeah, I think if I had run in a ranked choice voting system, my experience would have been way, way better. I think the clearest example that you can give is the following. Imagine you're a campaign volunteer. You're walking around a neighborhood, knocking on doors, telling people to vote for your favorite candidate. You come upon a door, you knock on a door, and a voter opens the door, looks at the t-shirt you're wearing, it shows that you're in favor of your favorite candidate, and let's say that voter already has their own favorite candidate. If they see that your candidate comes at the expense of their own candidate in our winner-take-all system, they might close the door in your face. The conversation ends.
Right.
But under a ranked choice voting system, the conversation continues because your candidate doesn't come at the expense of this voter's candidate. You all can say, well, how similar are your candidate's values to my candidate? If they're pretty similar, I can rank my candidate first and I can rank your candidate second. And that way we create more of a collaborative, less toxic campaign year. I would have loved a less toxic campaign year. I would have loved to go on Twitter and see people who are 90% aligned with me saying, hey, vote for Girmay second, even though I have this other guy that I like first. Rather than, oh, I'm 90% aligned with this person, but they're my enemy now because they come at the expense of my own candidate. That's not a sustainable system in my view, especially in an era of toxic social media that's super divisive and polarizing. We need to work more together in order to solve these big problems ahead of us.
And it's about what the system incentivizes, if I'm hearing that right, that right now you don't have to be the best candidate, you just have to look better than everyone else. And there's two ways of doing that. You can run a really positive campaign, like the way you and others do, but running a really negative campaign to make everyone else look bad, it does the same amount of good. And if people have second and third choices, then it's kind of a reverse of those incentives where you have to make the best affirmative case for yourself, and other people are going to try to compete you on what positive case that they can make for themselves rather than, being negative.
Right, right.
A lot of the time when we talk about democracy reform or electoral reform, it could sound like just making and improving the political process, and people don't always get a sense of how it would change outcomes on the policies that are most important to them. So if you had ranked choice voting and proportional representation and a third of county council members and commissioners across the state, rather than currently what it is, just less than 5% were from communities of color, what would be different about the ways that our governments take action on important issues?
Yeah, if we have a system that elects public officials who are reflective of the voting population, more reflective of the voting population, at the same time, then we'll see the issues that are reflective of the voting population being passed at the government level. So imagine in our current system, if homeowners are overrepresented, and they likely are, then the policies that would be passed would probably skew toward homeowners and not toward renters. If more of renters were represented at the elected level, then we would likely see more policies that benefit renters. And you can go down the line. Lower income people could see policies that benefit them. Racially diverse people could see policies that benefit them. Gender diverse people. And so that's really the benefit. The voting system is just a medium. It's just an avenue toward better, more reflective policies.
Why do you think it's so important that Washington State get started on implementing some of these reforms?
Right now, we're facing some of the biggest existential threats to our society that maybe we've ever seen. Climate change, the pandemic, our housing crisis. There are so many things that I could check off that feel like we need to solve them now. The problem is the infrastructure of our democracy makes it hard to solve those things. There are so many things that we need to do differently around the actual guts of our democracy. The filibuster, campaign finance, the electoral college, and the way we elect people. We need to fix all of those things if we're going to fix the big substantive things that are posing a challenge for our existence. And Washington State has always been at the forefront of democracy reform. We have democracy vouchers, we have prepaid postage on our ballots, we have year-round vote by mail. These are all things that have always been at the forefront of democracy reform, and this is the logical next step. Not only who gets to vote, but how do we vote? How do we vote needs to be improved if we're going to have an elected official representation that reflects the people who are voting.
One of the things that I think about is that while it seems like it takes a long time for things to change, our country and our experiment with self-governance and democracy is actually really young. It's only a handful of generations. And in one generation away, that was the first time that people of color got their voting rights secured and protected, but inside of a system that still is tilted towards some of the most affluent people who the system works fine for, but not for most people who feel ignored or not represented by our elected officials. So when you think about what a future with more choices and better representation for everyone, what it would look like and what would it feel like, what comes to mind for you?
It makes me feel hopeful. You know, it feels like how you're talking about every generation, the scope of who gets to be included in humanity and in participation and dignity gets wider and wider every generation. And this feels like a way of making our humanity and our dignity and who gets to participate wider and get to include more voices. And that's the reason why I got into politics.
Yeah, and for me, it makes me excited. There's a lot of problems that feel insurmountable, but this is one that's core, and it feels exciting to have a big project for our generation and the role that we get to play in making this country the place we want it to be, the place that maybe you're an immigrant or the child of immigrants that they imagined immigrating to, and getting to work on that in a way that everyone can get involved in and participate in is thrilling.
Definitely. And thank you for the work that you're doing and your whole team. It's really important.
And we're lucky to have you in elected office fighting the good fight.
Appreciate it.